Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Zach, and we got a great show today. We're going to discuss a little bit more leadership topics, a little bit more leadership in practice, and just kind of building people up and giving them the tools to be successful in whatever their future may be. However, I can't do this alone, even though I probably could if I tried. So as always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are you doing today?
Hey Zach, some days I'm going to make you do this alone, and we're going to see what happens. And I'm tempted to do that, but then I'm afraid that you actually would do it alone, and then I'd be out on the street, have podcast. We'll do podcast for food kind of thing. All right. Hey Zach, as usual, I got to thank our listeners. They are the reason we do this, and without you guys out there, we would not be the global top 10% podcast that we are. So thank you to all our listeners. As usual, you can reach us at buffnagle@buffnagle.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music. If you can think up a podcast place, we are probably on that. Hey, and if you are new to our podcast, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm sure you came here today to listen to our wise and wonderful guest. But we'd love to ask you to give us 4 episodes. Subscribe to our little podcast, listen for 4 times, and see if there's not a reason for you to come back. We're talking about all sorts of different things, and we will certainly come up with something that will resonate with you. So hit the little button, hit the subscribe thing. It doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps us when it comes to reviewing the podcast and seeing where we are. So that's our normal stuff today, Zach. Let's get to it. We have a great guest, from what I understand.
Yes, we do have a great guest. We have a West Point graduate of 2013. He's about to be enrolled in the Master's of Public Policy at the University of Texas, Austin. He is the only Alabama fan I like. He's known us for almost a decade, which I don't know why. And he's a big fan of sarcastic comments and positive vibes, if those two things can go together. So it is my great guest and honor to bring on Peary Cox. So Peary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a good day to be here.
All right. Hey, well, thank you. So Peary is a classmate. We got to know him when Harry was there. So Harry and Peary are old buddies, and that makes things interesting if people are not enunciating well. But Peary, you are Johnny Tank Commander, and you do Army things. Can you tell us about how you get to where you are and what you did? Because you went through the West Point thing, and now you're in Texas, and you just got done playing around the golf. How did you get to where you are?
So I started out at West Point, and right after West Point, you can commission as a second lieutenant. I graduated in 2013 as an armor officer. I did my first tour of duty at Fort Bragg in North Carolina with the 82nd Airborne Division. Learning to jump out of planes that work for no good reason. I did that for 4 years, went to Iraq in 2017. And then after that, I got promoted to captain, where I moved to Fort Hood. And Fort Hood is where I have been for the last 3 years. While at Hood, I did 2 rotations over to Europe. So one in 2018, and then I just got back from one that I left in November of 2020 and ended in May of 21. So that is where I have been. And it's a little different because most of the armor officers, so tanks, usually stay on one side of the fence. So we call it light side versus heavy side. Light, obviously, being either without vehicles or with your basic run-of-the-mill Humvees. And then on the heavy side is the tanks and the Bradleys and everything that goes boom. Which, I don't know. I've enjoyed being on both sides of the fence. I know a lot of my classmates have only stuck to the heavy side, but I enjoyed the opportunity that it presented, even though it was a very different sort of doctrine and tactics that go along with jumping out of an airplane versus riding in a tank that just likes to crush everything in its way.
Does the tank ever fly out of the helicopter? I mean, they did that in the A-Team, so it has to be true.
So actually, that is what most of my graduation essays were about, because I asked like what you want to do, and the Army is developing a tank that will come out of the back of a plane again. I don't think that we'll get one that'll ever come out of a helicopter, just because our helicopters are not as big as Russia's and whatnot, and it's not really the skill set that's assigned to our helicopters.
All right, so you are a tank, or you are a tank commander. We're a tank commander, certified to be a tank commander. What?
So I was a tank commander. So I had for 18 months from May of 2019, and I left in October of last year. So I had 14 tanks under my command, 3 other officers, and a host of non-commissioned officers and enlisted. And then I also was responsible for my mechanics, and let's just say that their toolbox is the size of an 18-wheeler, the back of an 18-wheeler, and costs just as much as a tank.
All right, so when you're in charge of so if one of the tanks is not running, if one of the officers is not doing his or her job, if there's any problems at all with those 14 tanks or the people that make them go, you're the guy who's responsible. Your ass is on the line.
Yep. So I am the buck stops here. Some people kind of believe that company commanders aren't supposed to be that, but it is my firm belief that as a company commander, you own everything under your roof. I was signed for all 14 tanks, and total combined worth was about $150 million, all said and done. And yes, the tanks that I had, we're turning them in and getting new tanks currently as an Army for modernization purposes. But the tanks I had basically been used since the early 2000s. So I had a general officer who probably was in my shoes 20 years ago, who said that the tank that I was driving that day was the same tank that he drove when he was a company commander in like 2004.
Okay, so I had until recently a 2006 Toyota Sequoia that we drove for like 200 and some thousand miles, and then we went to CarMax and traded that in. So is that how do you replace it? I mean, do they just say, "Hey, look, Merry Christmas, here's a new tank for you guys," or how does that get replaced? What do you do?
I wish it was that simple. So they call them the SEP V3s is the new model of the tank, and they've been in development for a while. But the way that it goes is there's a whole schedule of modernization that the big Army does for every unit. So we're not the first to receive the new tanks. We did test them out last year, but we will be one of the last brigades, I think, to receive the new tanks. But as for how long a tank lasts, the engines are only rated for about 1,400 hours. And if you break one of the engines before it reaches 1,400 hours, you end up having to pay for it.
But they can't take that out of your check, right? I mean, Zach, do you make enough to pay for a tank? I mean,
no, but yeah.
So how do you guys pay for it? I mean, is that?
So an officer is the only one that's allowed to fully pay for something if it's deemed, and we only pay for it if it's deemed to be like your fault for breaking the tank. So I think I replaced 14 or 16 engines in 18 months, but only one of those engines was my fault. Not my fault, but my company's fault. And so we had to do a bunch of retraining with that. Because they installed basically the air conditioning system for the tank upside down.
Nice.
So
it's a manufacturer defect is what I'm hearing?
No, I think that's a scheduled maintenance defect.
Scheduled maintenance issue. Because you gotta think the engines that we've been using haven't changed much. So it's a 1970s jet turbine with aluminum fans, because of course, and the fans are what shred more often than not inside the turbine.
All right, so these tanks are running on jet engines.
Yep.
Is that what you just said?
Yep.
And what do they burn?
JP8, and so it takes about 40 to 50 gallons, give or take a little bit, to start one of these behemoths. So there's four. Yeah, a tank is a gas guzzler. Like everyone talks about, like a truck or a car or a van being a gas guzzler. But when you talk miles per gallon for a tank, it's gallons per mile. It's not miles per gallon at all.
So the tank on a tank, the gas tank, has got to be monstrously huge.
Yeah, so there's actually 3 gas tanks. There's one in the front left, front right, and then a giant one in the rear.
And that'll last you how long? I mean, highway miles versus city miles. I mean, it's got to be how long does you fill this thing up and you can run for a couple hours for all day?
So my planning factor when I was a commander and looking at the logistical train was 8 hours. I would plan about every 8 hours I would need refueling, particularly with the mission that I had in my larger organization. I was the brigade decisive effort. So basically, anytime that we were conducting offensive operation training, if there was a penetration or the enemy decided to retreat in some place, that's where my company's going. So we always had to be pretty close to on top of our fuel, ammo, and other things because we never knew when that call was going to come.
So you talked about light side and heavy side. And so the heavy side, that's the tank itself. And the light side is all the other stuff that I'm going to say the group, but the company of tanks requires. It's like, I mean, you're talking like the fuel trucks and the taco truck to feed the guys and that kind of, is that
So the light side is like the 82nd Airborne Division, the 101st. It's a totally different organization. We've done some joint training, and it's been done actually a lot in Europe with our partner nations because they have more dismounted. It's a dismounted infantry organizations that are what make up light forces, if that makes sense, or what we like to call light, because they don't have any armor like steel plates protecting them really.
So you guys with being on the heavy side, so you guys can go anywhere and pretty much do anything as long as they're not dropping nukes on you. You're all good. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, so it gets a little uncomfortable if we're receiving like our rocket and artillery fire. You're talking like concussions or anything because you're just in a giant steel behemoth, and there's not really any padding inside of a tank except for the driver. He has this nice chair that leans back. It's actually like a really nice chair because he's at the very front of the tank, and your loader is usually standing up the whole time because we, unlike a lot of other nations, don't have auto loaders in our tank. We still have a human loading. It means less air, I think, and it's faster more often than not. But they have to be able to load around, and our standard is 4 seconds. And then the gunner, where he sits, is underneath where the tank commander sits, and it is cramped. So my gunner is from Knoxville, Tennessee, and like 5'8", so he fits fine in it. But you're talking, you put anyone over 5'8" in the turret, and it's going to get cramped real quick.
All right, so I'm just trying to think about the tanks in my head, and the tanks in my head are pictures of like in that one Indy Jones movie that was like the tank, that was like a Nazi tank. But these are different machines than the ones we've seen for World War II, right? These are really big machines, and they like how big are these things, and what can they do that I would not expect them to do?
So I don't know about lengthwise, but it's got 7 road wheels, so probably 20, 25 feet long, and then it's 11 feet tall. The Bradley, which is what the reconnaissance units use, is actually taller. But if you're thinking of things that a tank can do that you wouldn't think that it could do, it is great at breaking down trees. So it definitely is its own wrecker, and you can actually mount things on the front of the tank, like mine blades. If you're thinking of like a snow sweeper or a snow plow, you can put those on the front of a tank, which is kind of cool. Unfortunately, my company, the two that we had that worked, we decided to run over them both times. But it's training, so it was worth it.
So, all right, so you have to put these new engines and stuff. Like these are jet aircraft engines. Well, they're jet engines, but are they essentially equivalent to what we see on airplanes?
So it's a Honeywell engine. I'm not a super technical guy.
I'm not an engineer.
Yeah, no, I'm not an engineer. My international law and Arabic degree really got me far in life. um, but I mean, it is a turbine system. It's not your piston-driven system that you're going to see in cars or trucks.
Yeah. So Zach, you may not know this, but when I was in college, I worked with a group at the University of Dayton called the Structural Integrity Division of the Research Institute, and we studied jet aircraft engine turbine blades and how to test them for cracks, because if they have cracks, they will do what Peary said, they will shred, and if they fly apart, that it takes the whole thing down, right? So is that what kills your engines? Is the blades just fly apart?
So for most of my tank engines, yeah, it was more often than not the blades that busted.
And do they wreck the whole rest of the thing, or is it you can't just replace a blade because you got like pieces of blade flying around and everything gets damaged, and then you guys
Yeah.
got to hike home.
Well, so the way that we have trained recently, which was different than I have done, is that we repaired everything while we were still at training. So if we had an engine break or one of the tracks break or something, we repaired it in the field. And so we actually used, it's called a Hercules, and it's actually bigger than a tank, but it's our own wrecker service. And you can take an engine out of a tank with it and then put another one into the tank and install it. And then only my guys were like incredible at it. I was gifted with some incredible mechanics who are only stay in the Army because they get to work on tanks. But they could do it in under 3 hours of pulling an engine out and reinstalling it and being able to go, which is just insane when you think about the number of parts that are moving with that.
If for people who comparing engines and putting things together, if you're familiar with F1 racing, it takes them like 12 hours sometimes to repair engine parts and stuff like that. And those are smaller parts and they're a lot easier to fit. This is a tank, maybe more complicated parts, and the turbo jet spinning around turbine engine going in there too. So the impressive feat is these guys are doing this while in the field and stuff like that as well. It's just, it adds another layer.
Is that 3 hours in the field? So like if they're like camped under an oak tree, right? I mean, right?
Oh yeah, I mean we've done it. We've done it in rain. We have done it. It hadn't snowed. Thankfully, I've not been in the field in a tank in the snow. Although tank engine's pretty hot, so that would be fine. But yeah, rain, mud, all types of conditions, windstorms, working on tanks because the tank. If you know how to take care of your equipment, which is one of the biggest things that we have sometimes failed at in the Army. If you take care of your equipment, it'll take care of you. So for us, like the tank, if your tank doesn't work, you're not going anywhere. You're not shooting anything. What is your job at that point? So a lot of my junior soldiers and particularly my non-commissioned officers really took that to heart and like we call them grease monkeys. They just loved working on their tanks. I think I went through 2 or 3 mechanic overall sets working with my gunner when he was teaching me everything. Since when I showed up after jumping out of airplanes, I knew absolutely nothing about a tank. I had shot one once like 7 years ago and hadn't been inside of one since then. And I basically lived inside one for 18 months.
So I want to talk to you because you talked about how good your personnel were for maintenance and repair, and you've worked with a number of officers and non-commissioned officers. So So what's that experience having, I don't know, probably what, 25 or 30 people underneath you and $150 million worth of stuff? What's the team dynamic like, and how do you make it? What makes it work and what makes it not work?
Yeah, but before you do that, I also want to piggyback off this and go back to something you mentioned earlier about the buck stopping here with you as the commanding officer. So kind of like that concept, and then kind of what Rafe mentioned about the leadership and management of people merging together. There's a question in there somewhere, so I'm just going to throw that right back to you.
Yeah, so I will actually say that being on the light side, where what matters most is the person and not your equipment, taught me and prepared me to actually be a better company commander. So for being a commander, I had 4 officers underneath me, 5 officers underneath me, and about 80 soldiers. So the way that looked, we had 3 platoons, and then the mechanic platoon who kind of did their own thing because they were self-sufficient. But for me as a commander, like I said, the buck stops here. A lot of people, when they're a commander, really just sit in their office all day, do paperwork, aren't super involved with the daily running of your company and your unit. And yes, you have officers underneath you, but just like when I was a platoon leader, I was lost in the sauce most of the time. I didn't know what I was doing other than when my NCOs told me, be here, do this, don't ask this question. Which was interesting because my platoon leaders, when I was in command, were classmates of my brother from West Point. So that was an interesting dynamic that I got to work with. But again, like focusing on the people, because on the heavy side, like the tanks are sometimes considered the most important part of the organization, and you forget that we are a human organization and we are heavily reliant on the human factor to make our organizations work as well as they do, or in some cases not work as well as we do. And there are plenty of examples of both throughout the Army's history, and sometimes it's hard to find the middle ground for the military, at least.
Yeah, so you got all these people working for you. The officers report directly. So there's a chain of command there with you and the officers, and then the soldiers underneath them. Is that how that's set up?
Yeah. So I only had 2. My tank crew was like the only junior enlisted guys that I really worked with on a daily basis, other than my first sergeant, who was the senior non-commissioned officer in the batch. But mainly I worked through the officers and their second in commands, which was also a senior non-commissioned officer that I knew. I got to know all of them pretty well.
So these guys, like, but there's some age dynamic. I guess I'll call it inverted age dynamics going on here. Like you have some senior guys in the Army that have been there a long time, that are probably substantially older than you are, but you outrank them. Is that was that ever an issue? Did that ever become a problem, or do people just put their nose down and they say, this is the way it is, this is how I'm going to make it work?
So my first, I guess we call them battle buddies. I do, at least. My first sergeant was sergeant first class. He'd been in 19 and a half years, and I think I was cusping on 6 years when I became in company command. So he'd seen it all. And the first day that I took command, like I sat down with him and was like, I don't know anything about tanks. Like, you are going. And so he actually, his last gunner became my gunner. Huge UT fan. So we always enjoyed watching the Bama game together, and yet UT has yet to win, so he's a little salty about that. But really setting up that dynamic where he gave me someone that was the subject matter expert. It didn't matter to me that he was lower ranking to me. At that point, I am the student. Like, yes, I know the leadership, I know the tactics, but I don't know the platform, which was definitely an eye-opening experience. The manual for a tank is 1,500 pages long, so it took me about 3.5 weeks to make it through that a couple times.
So when you talk about you have a gunner, like, I guess I'm imagining there's a number of people in the tank when it's operating, doing its thing, right?
Yep.
There's is it the commander, the gunner, and the, would you call it, the loader? Or
yeah, so there's 4 people in each of our tanks. A lot of the European tanks are only 3 because they have an autoloader system inside their tank. But yeah, so you have a driver, a loader, a gunner, and then the tank commander. And like for me, that was who I went to work with every day. Like if they're in the motor pool, I'm in the motor pool. And I expected my tank commanders to be the same way. Like the way I viewed a lot of office work was you can find your own time to do it. Like if the mechanics aren't looking at your tank specifically that time, like maybe you're doing something else or whatnot. Because I didn't have a mechanic for every tank. I had 3 groups of mechanics that would rotate their work. Because sometimes we would have to do 24-hour shifts just to get prepared for the field with how old the tanks were and the maintenance that needed to be done. Also because the fire control system is hydraulics. And for anyone that has worked with hydraulics and being around metal things, hydraulics, the pipes, not the pipes, but the tubes bust a lot. And so having to wire those inside of a tank was always a joy.
So did you have like special little, like you said, your gunner was a little guy, 5'8", and he fit in there just fine. Is that, do they tend to put people in those positions that do that, or did some people get stuck with a guy who's 6'2" and who really should be having a different job as a gunner, or how do they pick people to do those jobs? How does that get laid out?
So people do it different ways. Usually it falls on seniority. The way that we did it in my company, and Sergeant Kuhn really helped me establish this culture because he and Sergeant Udich and Sergeant Murillo basically trained all of my non-commissioned officers and molded them into who they were. Was you were a driver first and foremost. So the driver signs for all the equipment inside the tank, so he knows everything about the tank and what it's supposed to be. Once your tank commander thinks you've done a good enough job as being a driver, then you'll move to a loader. And a loader, his job, besides just loading, that's where the radios are in his station. So he also mans the radios, which for me is super important because I'm usually switching between 4 or 5 radio nets, and you only have 2 nets in the tank at a time. You can only have 2, so your loader has to like switch the radio channels often. And then the loader is basically the apprentice to the gunner. So anytime the gunner wants to teach the loader something, they'll switch positions. The loader will sit where the gunner sits, the gunner sits where the loader sits, and then he'll just talk them through a bunch of things.
So when you talk about a loader, I'm trying to figure out, it's like, I can imagine, like, are these like big shells that get loaded into the big gun? Are these like machine guns? What do the tanks shoot?
So the tank shoots a 120 millimeter round. They've got a couple different variants. The heaviest weighs about 60 to 62 pounds, and the lightest, the training rounds, are like 44, 45 pounds. And so they sit behind the loader, and he has to open where they sit, pull the round out, shove the round in, and then arm the gun all within 4 seconds.
So these guys got to be a little bit jacked to be able to do that. Is that right?
Sometimes my last loader, is actually from Washington. The Tellin boss was 5'4" maybe, and maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. So I don't know. I think the ability of moving rapidly and accurately is what is better for them. But yeah, if it's a long day, so we had our last couple of days on the range before we went to Europe, we were shooting 40, 50 rounds in a day. Like the loader is absolutely smoked after that. But that is not a normal day. At most, you're usually shooting about 10 to 12 rounds a day.
Now you've had some interesting. We talked about this before we started recording. Some interesting situations that have arisen with regard to personnel, and your company or your platoon or brigade was the first to do a certain thing.
Yeah. So Alpha 2-8 and 1st Brigade First Cav was one of the first units to become fully gender integrated. So when they allowed females into combat arms, the company was one of the first to receive not fresh female soldiers like right out of basic, but those that had transferred over from a different job into being a tank or a tanker. So I had 7 of them, and something that I was really proud of, particularly with them, is how well they were integrated and how well they've done. So Staff Sergeant Eskew is going to finish up being a tank commander this summer, and she's going to move on to some new things. And then now Sergeant Shoemate, probably one of the best gunners in the company, one of Sergeant Kuhn's gunners, actually. I think she's only shot distinguished, which is the best that you can shoot at gunnery. Other than one time where the gun messed up and she started screaming so much that we heard it over the radio because she was screaming at Sergeant Kuhn, who was her tank commander at the time. That was pretty funny.
So, but having them successfully integrate has got to be, it's got to be a joint effort between the guys that are there and the ladies that are coming in. It's got to be on both sides, right? I mean, you can't put the assignment to integrate that successfully just on one of those groups. It's got to be, everybody's got to be all in.
Yeah, so I think, and it's showed with time that the non-commissioned corps that was in my company compared to some of the others really took it on as their job to integrate them and make them trained. I mean, if the Army is going to be gender integrated, then you have to give them a chance to succeed. And I think that my non-commissioned officers really did that, because the NCOs in a company are there much longer than the officers. So they're establishing the culture. Like, I can come in and I'm only there for 18 months, but people like Sergeant Murillo, Sergeant Kuhn were in that company 6-7 years, Sergeant Varner. So they're the ones that establish the culture, and you've got to get the buy-in from them first, and then the rest of the men and the soldiers to really embrace that. And they really did, which ended up in some great things for Animal Company. So we won top tank company in the division, my first year in command, the top reenlistments, and we're still one of maybe 3 or 4 companies in the Army that have the majority of its first class of females that switched over into being the tankers and enjoying the tank life.
Well, that's got to be a feather in your cap, then.
I thought it was. Some people did not, but
well, that's right. Okay. So you were. So I want to go back to you went abroad and did some things in Europe, and have you I can't imagine you take your tank and you fly to Berlin and you drive your tank around Berlin. I mean, what do you
run over a couple of trees in Berlin?
That's right. So
going to Wisconsin.
Yeah, looking for Matt Damon or something. What did you do when you were overseas?
So the first time I went over there, and we put the tanks on boats to get them there. So I think port operations are not very fun, very time consuming, putting a behemoth on another behemoth. And I think tanks are big, and then you see one of these ships and they fit the entire brigade's worth of vehicles on it and whatnot. Not exactly, but almost, and it's impressive. But when we're in Europe, we're spread out all across Europe training with our partner nations. So I've been in Germany. My company, once I left, they went to Lithuania with the new commander, Captain Corbin, and they actually have gone twice now to go to Latvia and train with the Latvians and then the NATO battle groups that are up there. But it's really, when we're going into Europe, it's all about training with your NATO partners and allies and seeing how they do things differently.
So did you get the opportunity or the assignment to go somewhere that was a little less docile than maybe Latvia?
Yeah. So my first overseas tour, I went to Iraq in 2017. I actually landed in Kuwait, and they were like, "Happy New Year's," which was great. But I went to Iraq in 2017. I was there for 4.5 months, and we went into both East and West Mosul with Second Brigade and Colonel Work, and really just teamed up with a multitude of Iraqi partners. So I was with the FedPol and then the ERD. Um, Ended up inside Mosul at the end of my deployment and just seeing how they worked to retake what ISIS had taken from them and how they worked was really neat, but also different because you got to think we left Iraq in 2012, 2014. So when we showed back up to defeat ISIS, there was no infrastructure to support ourselves. So it was self-sustainment at its finest in a combat environment, which meant a lot of MREs and hoping that the Iraqis would cook enough that you could eat with them as well.
So like typically there would be support staff. You're talking like a fort that you could retreat to and get yourself. And we all see those pictures, right? We see pictures of from Afghanistan or somewhere where there's an area behind a big fence with barracks and stuff. But you guys were on your own, like sleeping in a tent and drinking out of a canteen or something, or.
So there was that area, but the places that I was fortunate to be sent to were more forward than that. So I lived out of a lot of houses that had been abandoned when ISIS came around, which was interesting because as a platoon leader and you're by yourself with your platoon establishing security around a house that you've seen once, you don't have any preparation, and that was interesting because we were right next to the Mosul airport with the FedPol preparing to take the west side of or retake the west side of Mosul. But yeah, we got resupplied maybe once every 3 or 4 days. So it was a lot of water out of the canteens, a lot of MREs, a lot of no power. The power that you got was out of the back of your vehicle because obviously there wasn't any power inside Mosul at the time.
Wow. So they just drop you in there, or you started from that the not whatever the not forward position is, and then you kind of push the bad guys back? Is that how that works?
Yeah, so we started in Key West and drove up there. No airborne operations this time around, but yeah, we drove with the Iraqis up all the way from where Key West was, which was really like the toehold of where the farthest that ISIS reached for at least their governance, and then spent the first 2 months on the east side, closing out East Mosul, and then we kicked off the west side in February, and that went all the way until July, until the last of ISIS was eliminated from the stronghold that was the old city of Mosul.
So you helped kick them out, and is that a matter of did they get captured and then sent to the prison? Were they all eliminated? Did they run away, or how does that, or all of the above?
Yeah, all of the above. So we didn't touch any of the prisoners or whatnot. The Iraqis were responsible for that. We're there as advise and assist, and it changed when after the election in 2016 to allow us more freedom of maneuver on the ground. That enabled us to make closer to real-time combat decisions to enable our partners. Because you got to think a lot of things that ISIS did was pioneering. I mean, it's still continuing in Syria in the civil war today, but using drones as bombers. The Mad Max-looking cars became 2 to 3.5 ton, just giant vehicle-borne IEDs that became their precision guided munition, as we called it, compared to like us using missiles or whatnot. And so urban warfare is a whole different monstrosity that really is not pretty. I mean, I think we've learned that all the way from Stalingrad to Chechnya to now Mosul twice now.
So you're in Mosul and you're pushing the bad guys back. So obviously you had some training somewhat to help you with that, but they can't train you exactly to do that sort of thing. So what pieces of your training in the actual army stuff and in leadership and those kinds of things were helpful to you there, and which pieces Which pieces really let you down? They were that you either felt you didn't have, or things that didn't work.
So I'll start with good first because that's a little easier. Between myself and my platoon sergeant Whittier, it was about just being a good dude, like first and foremost, to like the people underneath you, and then also the people you're working with. Because you get all these stories when people come back from deployments and whatnot, and they're bad mouthing their partners or their allies or who they've worked with, whether it be another branch of service, another unit, another nation, or whatnot. And I mean, neither of us had been in Iraq ever. The first time in Iraq, I don't know my way. Went to on the bad side. I deployed with a map from like 2004. Probably wasn't very accurate. But you gotta go in there with an open mind and an open heart and just be able to really learn. Like, yes, we are the Americans, and yes, we've been fighting a while, but again, we left. It's a totally different environment when we came back in. So just being able to learn and be adaptable, which gave us the ability to link in with our partners and go further forward than just sitting on the base way back in the rear and not being able to make real time combat decisions that probably saved a lot of lives for the Iraqis, particularly with what we were able to target and whatnot. And then on the bad side, I would say that preparation wise, we didn't exactly know what we were getting into just because of how rapidly the situation in Iraq was changing, with them restarting their offensives against ISIS and being able to enable multiple Iraqi units to do that. We had no idea what we were getting into. Again, I deployed with an atlas of maps from 2003, which probably were used in the initial invasion of Iraq the second time, and I was eventually able to get a map from my Iraqi counterparts that was like very up to date, had like a lot of good stuff on it, and then also on the adaptive side was not being able to sometimes figure out where your next meal was coming from other than the MRE that you had prepared.
I mean, there's a lot of those little humility and understanding your situation things that you got to understand when you're put in a new place, regardless of if you're an army commander or if you're, going from team A to team B and you're looked at as a leader in that sense. There's always those things that you got to play with. So Peary, one last question before we let you go. What advice can you give to our listeners to help them seek the good in their own life?
I would say that you've got to listen first before making any actions. And in listening, you'll probably find something out about the person that you're with, or the situation that you are in that you wouldn't have thought about otherwise. I know as Army guys, we're always gung ho, go at 'em, real type A personalities, but sometimes the best way to figure out the situation that you're in and improve yourself is listening to someone else, because there's got to be someone that that's going through the same situation you're going through now, or in the same scenario that you're in.
Yeah, well, I hear that, and that's often one of those that requires a certain amount of humility and a certain amount of taking yourself out of the equation, and not letting pride get in your way. And I think that's a lesson we ought to all learn. I mean, pride is that first sin, and that'll always trip you up. So listening first. And let yourself be a little bit humble to learn some things, because there's no way you always know it all.
Yeah, I mean, Peary, you mentioned this multiple times. Sometimes that just because you are the West Point grad doesn't mean that you don't find the smartest person in the room and use them. And that's going to make you actually the smartest person in the room by finding the smartest person in the room. That's a skill I think a lot of people, I myself am still trying to do it to this day. So again, Peary, thank you for coming on. It's been wonderful to talk with you and enjoy these stories.
Yeah, thank y'all, and I really enjoyed it, and I'll see y'all around.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. So again, thank you to all of our listeners for listening today. Go seek the good, be the good, and spread the good. Go enjoy the adventure of life.